The wind whispers secrets across the vast, star-dusted plains, carrying tales of journeys undertaken in a time when distance was measured in days, not hours. Imagine a ribbon of communication stretching across a continent, a vital artery pulsing with news, hopes, and the very pulse of a young nation. This is the story of the Pony Express, a legendary feat of speed and endurance. But beneath the iconic images of swift riders and galloping horses lies a less celebrated, yet equally crucial tapestry, woven with the knowledge and resilience of those who knew this land intimately, those who were here long before the riders, and those whose quiet service made the impossible possible. To truly understand the epic undertaking of the Pony Express, we must journey back to the very earth it traversed, and to the hands that shaped its survival, particularly the often overlooked contributions of Indigenous guides and the dedicated station keepers, many of whom were Indigenous themselves. Our story begins not with the hurried thundering of hooves, but with the quiet wisdom of the land itself, a wisdom held for millennia by the Indigenous peoples of North America. The establishment of the Pony Express in 1860 was an ambitious endeavor, born out of a need for rapid communication between the burgeoning West Coast and the established East. The plan was bold, a 1,800-mile relay of horse and rider, carrying mail across treacherous terrains from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California. It was a project of immense logistical challenge, one that relied on a network of stations, men, and horses, strategically placed to facilitate the non-stop journey. What is often absent from the popular narrative, however, is the profound dependence of this enterprise on the deep, inherited knowledge of the Indigenous peoples who had navigated these same landscapes for generations. Consider the formidable geography the Pony Express was tasked with conquering. It traversed deserts that shimmered with mirages, mountains that scraped the sky, and plains that stretched to the very edge of perception. These were not merely abstract distances on a map. They were living, breathing environments with their own rhythms, dangers, and hidden pathways. For those who planned the route, understanding the seasonal changes, the availability of water sources, the safest passes through mountain ranges, and the most direct, yet navigable routes across seemingly impassable terrain was paramount. This was precisely the knowledge that Indigenous peoples possessed in abundance. Many of the individuals who scouted and helped to establish the route for the Pony Express were themselves Indigenous. They possessed an intimate understanding of the land, honed through centuries of observation and adaptation. They knew where to find waterholes that might be hidden from the uninitiated eye, which canyons offered shelter from harsh winds, and which trails, though perhaps less obvious, were more reliable and less prone to flash floods or impassable snow. Their guidance was not merely about finding a path. It was about finding a survivable path. This was a form of applied geography and environmental science, passed down through oral traditions and lived experience, a knowledge system that predated written maps and official surveying expeditions. When the Pony Express Company, primarily composed of entrepreneurs and financiers from the East, began its ambitious undertaking, they often relied on the assistance of local Indigenous individuals to survey and scout the proposed route. These scouts were invaluable. They could read the subtle signs of animal trails that indicated the presence of water, interpret the flight patterns of birds to predict weather changes, and understand the migratory habits of animals that might impact travel. Their expertise was not just about navigating from point A to point B, it was about understanding the ecology of the journey. They could identify areas that would be safe for resting horses and riders, and areas that presented latent dangers, such as unstable ground or territories known for aggressive wildlife. It is crucial to understand that these Indigenous scouts were not simply hired laborers in the Western sense. They were individuals whose connection to the land was a spiritual and ancestral one. Their knowledge was not acquired through textbooks or formal training, but through a deep, symbiotic relationship with the environment. For them, the land was not an obstacle to be overcome, but a partner to be understood and respected. This understanding informed their every recommendation regarding the placement of stations, the optimal times for travel, and the most efficient routes. The establishment of the Pony Express stations themselves provides another vital area where Indigenous knowledge and participation were critical, though often unacknowledged. These stations, spaced roughly 10 to 15 miles apart, were more than just simple outposts. They were essential hubs for fresh horses, food, shelter, and mail transfer. The choice of location for each station was a decision of strategic importance. Factors such as access to water, defensibility, proximity to natural resources like wood for fuel, and ease of access for riders were all considered. In many instances, these ideal locations were already known to Indigenous peoples. They might be situated near existing encampments, hunting grounds, or reliable water sources. The construction and operation of these stations often involved the cooperation, or at least the tacit acceptance, of local Indigenous communities. In some cases, Indigenous individuals were directly employed as station keepers or as their assistants. These individuals brought not only their knowledge of the local environment, but also their practical skills in survival, animal husbandry, and resource management. Consider the role of an Indigenous station keeper. They were often the first line of defense against the harsh realities of the frontier. They understood the subtle shifts in weather that could turn a clear day into a blizzard, the signs of approaching storms, and the best ways to forage for food when supplies ran low. They knew which plants were edible and medicinal, how to preserve food for extended periods, and how to maintain the essential infrastructure of the station, the corrals, the stable, the living quarters, against the elements and potential threats. Their knowledge of animal behavior was also invaluable. They understood the needs of the horses, the best ways to calm them, and how to manage them in challenging conditions. They might have also possessed the skills to hunt or trap game to supplement the station's food supply, a crucial task in remote areas where resupply was infrequent and unreliable. Their presence at a station often provided a degree of stability and continuity, as they were deeply rooted in the land and its rhythms. The documentary evidence for these contributions, while not always overtly stated in the official company records, can be gleaned from various historical accounts. Diaries of riders, letters from station managers, and later ethnographical studies often reveal a reliance on Indigenous individuals for guidance, sustenance, and operational support. For example, a rider might note in his journal that the station keeper, a man named Runs with Deer, or Spotted Horse, showed him the safest way to ford a river during a high water season, or shared a method for finding dry tinder for a fire during a rainstorm. The Pony Express, in its brief but impactful existence from April 1860 to October 1861, was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. It symbolized the ambition of a nation to bridge its vast distances. Yet, the romanticized image of the lone rider, galloping through the night, often eclipses the quieter, yet equally essential contributions of those who facilitated his journey. The Indigenous guides who charted the paths and the Indigenous station keepers who maintained the outposts were not merely peripheral figures, they were integral to the very functionality of the enterprise. The challenges faced by the Pony Express were immense. Riders had to endure extreme weather, potential encounters with hostile individuals, and the constant physical strain of riding for hours on end. The horses were pushed to their limits, and the stations provided a critical respite. Without the knowledge of water sources, safe havens, and the practical skills possessed by Indigenous individuals, the establishment and maintenance of this vital communication line would have been infinitely more difficult, if not impossible. Let us delve deeper into the specific types of knowledge that were so crucial. When the surveyors and engineers from the East were planning the Pony Express route, they relied on maps that were rudimentary at best, and often inaccurate, particularly in the more remote and less explored territories. They were accustomed to a landscape that could be altered and controlled by human hands. The American West, however, was a wild and untamed place, governed by natural forces that demanded a different kind of understanding. Indigenous guides were instrumental in translating these maps into practical reality. They could identify discrepancies between the drawn lines and the actual terrain. They could point out where a planned route might be impassable due to a newly formed ravine, or where a seemingly short distance on the map would involve a treacherous climb. Their ability to navigate by the stars, by the subtle contours of the land, and by the behavior of the local fauna was a form of practical cartography that far surpassed anything the Eastern planners possessed. The placement of stations was another critical aspect where indigenous wisdom was paramount. A station needed access to reliable water, a crucial element for both horses and humans. Indigenous peoples had an unparalleled understanding of the hydrology of the land. They knew where underground springs might be found, where ephemeral streams would persist the longest after rainfall, and how to locate water in arid environments. This knowledge was not something that could be easily acquired from a map. It was the result of generations of living in close communion with the land. Furthermore, the selection of station sites often involved considerations of shelter and defense. Indigenous peoples understood which canyons offered natural protection from wind and snow, which elevated positions provided good vantage points, and which areas were less likely to be exposed to flash floods or rock slides. Their knowledge of the local flora and fauna also informed these decisions. They knew where to find wood for fires, where game might be more abundant for sustenance, and how to avoid areas that were known to be dangerous due to predatory animals. The skills of the station keepers were equally vital. Beyond the basic duties of feeding and watering horses and transferring mail, they were responsible for the overall well-being of the station and its inhabitants. In many cases, these station keepers were indigenous individuals who brought a wealth of practical skills to the role. Their knowledge of edible plants and medicinal herbs could be a lifesaver when regular supplies were delayed or lost. They knew how to tan hides for repairs, how to build effective shelters, and how to manage scarce resources. The story of William Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill, and his early days as a rider for the Pony Express offers a glimpse into this integrated system. While Cody became a legend, his ability to survive and thrive on the trail was undoubtedly enhanced by his encounters with and reliance on indigenous peoples. His accounts, though sometimes colored by the popular romanticism of the West, often mention the assistance he received from Native Americans, who shared their knowledge of the land and its resources. However, it is essential to remember the broader context of the time. The expansion of the United States westward was also a period of profound conflict and displacement for indigenous peoples. The very land on which the Pony Express operated was often ancestral territory that was being encroached upon. The relationship between the Pony Express Company and indigenous communities was therefore complex, ranging from cooperation and mutual reliance to suspicion and occasional conflict. It is important to acknowledge this duality. While the contributions of indigenous individuals were vital to the success of the Pony Express, their lives and their lands were also being profoundly impacted by the very forces that drove the expansion of American communication and settlement. The stations themselves were often simple structures, but their survival depended on constant effort and resourcefulness. A station keeper might have to contend with a broken fence, a shortage of hay for the horses, or the need to find additional water during a dry spell. These were challenges that required practical, hands-on solutions, often drawing upon traditional knowledge. For instance, if a water source began to dwindle, an experienced indigenous station keeper might know of an alternative, less obvious well or spring that others would overlook. The care of the horses was another area where indigenous knowledge proved indispensable. They understood the physiology and needs of horses intimately, often having raised and worked with them for generations. They knew how to read the subtle signs of fatigue or illness in an animal, how to apply poultices for injuries, and how to select the best grazing grounds. The swiftness of the Pony Express was, after all, directly dependent on the health and well-being of its equine charges. It is also important to consider the role of indigenous women in this narrative, though they are even less frequently documented. In many indigenous societies, women played crucial roles in resource management, food preparation, and the transmission of knowledge. While the Pony Express was a male-dominated enterprise in terms of its riders and officially recognized station keepers, the broader infrastructure of survival and sustenance in the West often involved women. They were the ones who might have prepared dried meats or jerky for riders, gathered medicinal herbs, or maintained the domestic aspects of a household that might be located near a station. Their contributions, though often behind the scenes, were vital to the functioning of the entire system. The rapid pace of the Pony Express meant that riders were constantly on the move, rarely spending more than a few minutes at each station. This meant that the station keepers had to be incredibly efficient and prepared for immediate departures. They had to have fresh horses ready, the mail pouch securely packed, and any necessary information about trail conditions or potential hazards passed on quickly. This required a level of preparedness and foresight that was often fostered by the practical demands of living in a frontier environment, a lifestyle deeply understood by indigenous peoples. The impact of the Pony Express, though short-lived, was significant. It demonstrated the feasibility of rapid communication across the continent and paved the way for the transcontinental telegraph. But its legacy is incomplete without acknowledging the foundational role played by indigenous individuals. They were the true navigators of this vast and challenging landscape, the keepers of the land's secrets, and the silent partners in this ambitious undertaking. The historical record, particularly from the perspective of the Pony Express Company and its investors, tends to focus on the figures of the riders and the businessmen. This is a common tendency in historical narratives, where the more visible actors often overshadow the less visible, but equally essential, individuals who make their actions possible. The indigenous guides and station keepers were, in many ways, the unsung heroes of the Pony Express. Their contributions were woven into the very fabric of its operation, their knowledge a silent force that enabled its success. Think about the sheer bravery and resilience required of both the riders and the people who supported them. The riders faced the immediate dangers of the trail, but the station keepers faced the ongoing, relentless challenges of maintaining a remote outpost, often in isolation, with limited resources. Their ability to do so effectively was profoundly enhanced by their understanding of the land and their practical skills, many of which were rooted in indigenous traditions. The Pony Express was a fleeting moment in the grand sweep of history, a testament to a particular era of American ambition. But the stories of the indigenous individuals who guided its path and sustained its operations are a reminder of the deeper, more enduring connections to the land that have always been present. Their knowledge was not just about survival, it was about a profound understanding of the natural world, an understanding that was essential for the success of any endeavor that sought to traverse and inhabit these vast territories. As we reflect on the Pony Express, it is important to move beyond the simple image of the galloping rider and to recognize the complex web of human interaction and knowledge that made this historic feat possible. The whispers of the wind across the plains carry not just the echo of hooves, but also the quiet wisdom of those who knew the land best. The indigenous guides and station keepers, whose contributions are an indispensable, though often overlooked, part of this remarkable chapter in American history. Their legacy is etched not in grand monuments, but in the enduring understanding of the land, a knowledge that was as vital to the Pony Express as the horses themselves. The story is richer, more complete, and more profoundly interesting when we acknowledge these foundational elements, the quiet strengths that enabled such a bold endeavor to take flight. The vastness of the American West was not conquered by speed alone, but by a deep, intimate, and often indigenous understanding of its every contour, its every season, and its every secret.